Seek out opportunities to collaborate with people who have different backgrounds. I think that engaging with diverse perspectives can help enhance your problem-solving abilities and really challenge you to communicate your ideas clearly and in a way that resonates with people of diverse backgrounds and a variety of different audiences.
I am an actuary.
I am an actuary.
I am an actuary.
Welcome to the We Are Actuaries podcast, where you'll meet leaders who use their actuarial powers to solve a range of problems and make a real difference. I am your host, Julia Lessing, and I'm a qualified actuary based in Australia. I help actuaries develop communication and leadership skills to build great actuarial careers. So settle in, learn from the best, and be inspired. Hi everyone, today we're talking about lessons from strategy consulting. What is strategy consulting? What can actuaries learn from strategy consulting frameworks? And specifically, how has one young actuary leveraged her experience in strategy consulting to accelerate her actuarial career? Joining us for this discussion is Holly Briffa, a young actuary passionate about transforming data into strategic insights to drive meaningful change. Holly uses data to help government and corporate clients make better decisions, optimise outcomes and shape strategies. She's led high-impact projects from developing forecasting tools for government departments to enhancing operational models for not-for-profit organisations. Strategy consulting has shaped Holly's interesting career path, and she joins us today to share her insights. Holly, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Julia. I'm really looking forward to today's conversation.
Likewise. I'm really looking forward to hearing what you've learned, in particular from strategy consulting, because it's such a unique experience to have as part of your actuarial toolkit. But first, Holly, I want to ask you the question I ask all of my clients. How do you use your actuarial superpowers to make a difference in the world?
Excellent, thank you. I guess to begin with, I don't really think of myself as having a superpower, but I do try to make a difference. And the way that I do that is by transforming data into strategic insights that hopefully drive some meaningful change. And you said it well in the introduction. I think with my experience in strategy consulting, I've really focused on particularly government and public sector clients and helping them to make evidence-based decisions that improve outcomes. So whether I'm developing a forecasting tool for a government department or redesigning an operating model, my goal is always to empower stakeholders to use data to tackle those complex challenges and ultimately improve outcomes for society.
And that's what it's all about, isn't it? Improving outcomes, using data for good. And it's really interesting listening to you reflect on how you use your actuarial superpowers in such a wide, diverse range of applications. And, you didn't once mention insurance in there, which is where many actuaries typically work. So really interesting to hear how you've carved out what we'd call a non-traditional career path, one that I'm very familiar with as well, because that's the kind of career path I've had too. But I'm curious to hear a bit more about strategy consulting. So for those of us, like those listeners who are not familiar with the term, can you describe what strategy consulting is?
Of course. And insurance will come up. I think as actuaries, we can't really avoid it, can we? So strategy consulting is a type of management consulting that's focused on helping organisations both develop and implement long-term plans to achieve their goals. So as you can imagine, it's a really diverse area that covers many different aspects of business strategy. So my journey to strategy consulting began with my Bachelor of Commerce at the University of Melbourne. And I think like many actuaries, I started the degree without really knowing what actuarial science entailed. I'd always enjoyed math, which is probably a common story.
Yep.
And the actuarial major seemed like a good way to incorporate that interest into my studies. But I wasn't really sure what career path I wanted to take. So while I was at uni, I participated in case competitions, and I was also really fortunate to take a management consulting subject, which involved traveling to Shanghai and working on a strategy project for a local client.
Wow.
And I found that through those experiences, I really enjoyed solving diverse problems and where those problems seemed to have a direct real-world impact. And as an actuarial student, there weren't a lot of us participating in those sort of competitions and doing those management consulting subjects. So I felt I brought a unique perspective. So those experiences led me to begin my career with a firm called Strategic Project Partners, or SPP, in Melbourne. And more recently, I have continued to pursue my interest in strategy consulting as a manager at EY within the actuarial analytics and systems design practice. And to give a little bit more flavour around what actuaries can do in the strategy consulting space. So as an actuary, I've always specialised in using data to inform decision making, to optimise outcomes, and to shape strategies. And this has largely been for government departments, particularly in the health and human services space, as well as statutory schemes, not-for-profits, and other public sector clients.
So, Holly, I'm curious because most actuarial students wouldn't take a management consulting subject at university. What prompted you to do that?
I think for me, again, so I was under the Melbourne model where we chose the Bachelor of Commerce. At high school, my favourite subjects were always legal studies, economics, and math. So I was actually considering going on to do the Juris Doctorate, and the actuarial major was a bit of a spur of the moment decision around, well, it's first year. If I want to do it, I have to start it now. Right. But I had a lot of other interests at the same time. And I think particularly in some of those core first year subjects like economics and accounting, I made a lot of friends who were doing lots of different, I guess, taking a bite out of everything that was, on offer at university. And, I was someone who at high school participated in debating and public speaking. So the case competitions felt like, something that was really aligned to my interests. And I think it was just a happy coincidence that I found a passion in that space.
Amazing. So you took that subject at uni and then you started your role at Strategic Project Partners after you graduated. And tell me a little bit about what were you doing there? What is strategy consulting in practice look like?
So I've been fortunate to have the opportunity to work on a lot of really interesting challenges. And I've also had in my career lots of people who have recognised the skill set that I can bring to problems before I have even been able to do that. So have brought me onto teams to show that I've got something to contribute. So some of the highlights for me in that strategy consulting experience has been working on projects, for example, to develop an approach to quantifying the impact of a university's contributions to industry, innovation, environment and community. And that was all about developing an evidence base that they can use to speak to stakeholders about the impact that they were having on society. I've also conducted maturity assessments. So one example that comes to mind is a maturity assessment for a CTP scheme that was looking to transition towards value-based healthcare. So understanding what their current state was and capabilities in that space, what the gaps were and what they might need to do to close those gaps. And I've also done a lot of work in data analytics. So for me, a highlight being supporting a workers' compensation scheme to develop wellbeing measurement capabilities. So this was a great opportunity to use linked data to help them transition from a liability focus to a more wellbeing-centric approach.
So I'm already hearing some of those parallels, Holly, between strategy consulting work, but also the domain that actuaries work in, often insurance, but also, workers' comp, and also using data to make a difference as well. So, yeah, fascinating. Okay, so tell us, what have you learnt from strategy consulting that has helped, that you've incorporated into your career now as an actuary?
So I think my experience has shown me that the most influential professionals that I've worked with aren't just the ones that can crunch the numbers and do the math. It's always the ones that are able to frame the insights in a way that drives action. And actually, one of my university lecturers highlighted this concept brilliantly. He once asked the class, if your model is precise but no one uses it, did you ever really build it? Ooh. And of course, that makes me think about that question, if a tree falls in the forest and no one hears it, does it make a sound?
Yeah.
So the way that I've reflected on that question is, just like a sound without an audience isn't heard, a model loses its value if stakeholders aren't brought along the journey to use it confidently in their decision making. So for me, an overarching learning from strategy consulting is that importance of engaging your stakeholders and bringing them on the journey with you. I think the other area where I've found strategy consulting to be beneficial is sharpening my problem-solving skills. So when people think about strategy consulting, I think a lot of people think of frameworks. And frameworks can be off-putting if they're used poorly, but I've found that toolkit for structured thinking and problem solving to be really useful and to help me think confidently in a number of different domains and disciplines.
Okay. Can you tell us a little bit about those frameworks or tools?
You're listening to the We Are Actuaries podcast, brought to you by Guardian Actuarial. For more information about our guest and today's episode, head over to guardianactuarial.com.au/podcast.
Of course. And I think there's really 3 areas that I believe these frameworks can benefit professionals in all areas. And I'd love to share them with you today. This is a predominantly audio medium, so I'm going to do my best to describe them. But if you are interested in the frameworks, I would really encourage anyone to jump on Google and see the visual representations that go alongside them, because I think they are really helpful.
Right. And you'll tell us what people can Google to find those visual frameworks?
Definitely.
Excellent. Okay, so what's the first one?
So the first area I like to use strategy frameworks in my actuarial work is in ideation. And ideation is all about generating ideas. And that could be ideas relating to new product features, strategic initiatives, or even modelling approaches. So I'm sure many of us have been in a brainstorming session where you have one person tossing out bold, brilliant, sometimes maybe a little bit questionable ideas. But then on the other side of the table, you've got someone who's quick to shoot those ideas down as being impractical. And that dynamic can feel a bit like a tug of war and really hard to make progress in. So this is where the double diamond framework comes into play. And that's what you should Google, the double diamond framework.
Double diamond framework, okay.
So the double diamond is a structured approach to ideation, and it essentially combines both divergent and convergent thinking. So under this approach, when we're faced with a problem, we first diverge to explore all aspects of the challenge. And then we converge to agree on a shared understanding of the problem. So that's, I think, really important. Thinking broad to consider, well, what are all the different things that we could consider, but then coming it back together to say, well, specifically, what problem are we going to solve? And do we all have the shared understanding of that problem? It is a double diamond. So we go again. The next approach is to diverge and brainstorm, well, what could all those potential solutions look like to the problem we've agreed to solve? And then finally, we converge to identify the preferred way to move forward.
Yeah.
And I found this approach to be fantastic in guiding stakeholders to really unlock their creativity in a brainstorming process. And that's because it reassures people that we will get to those important feasibility questions before we agree a solution, but that we don't need to start there. By thinking broadly, we can really explore all those different possibilities before we jump into a solution.
So powerful because, when you talk about brainstorming, what springs to mind for me immediately is being in a meeting room, maybe the whiteboard, someone's got a texter, and whoever's the loudest and most dominant in the room is usually the one that gets the ideas out. And quite often the junior people in the room or maybe the more quiet people in the room aren't heard or, like you said, might be shot down. And so you miss out on that opportunity of actually gathering all of the ideas. And so what you've just described is more of a systematic way to do that, a process around that, rather than just a blank canvas, a blank whiteboard to say, okay, what have we got? What ideas have we got? So fantastic.
I think it helps to alleviate, some people don't particularly like brainstorming processes and can be frustrated about where are we heading in this process. So I think giving some structure to it can help people to appreciate where you are in that process, what it's leading to. And if you do have a question around feasibility or, those important implementation considerations, at what point we will bring that into the conversation.
Yeah. And in my experience, educating and working and leading actuaries and actuarial teams, having a framework is a really powerful way to move things forward. And I'm generalising here, but many actuaries find it helpful to have some sort of structure to that kind of process that might feel a little bit fluffier than some of our numerical analysis. So this double diamond approach, that's been something you've used with actuarial teams?
Definitely. And I think even when, in a management role, if I am working with someone and coaching them to develop a modeling approach, telling them that we'll go through these 4 stages and that, at the moment we're really challenging ourselves to think broadly about the problem or to think broadly about the options, and then we'll subsequently converge on, the way forward. I think that helps people to, understand what's being asked of them rather than, as you said, just facing an open whiteboard.
Great. Love it. Double diamond.
I might move on to the next area.
Right. What's the second
So my
one?
second area that I like to use strategy frameworks is in decision making.
Mm-hmm.
And here I like to use a 2x2 matrix. And that's our keyword to Google.
Oh, love a good 2x2.
The 2x2 matrix.
2x2 matrix. That's what we put into Google. Okay, great.
So you can apply decision-making frameworks in conjunction with a double diamond, actually, when you're at those convergent phases of the process and you're looking to make a decision between various options. So here, the 2x2 matrix can help you clarify the options by evaluating them against the criteria that are most important to the decision you need to make. Mm-hmm. So using a 2x2 approach, when you're faced with the need to make a choice between some options, it can be really helpful to firstly identify, well, what are those most important factors driving your decision? And this could be cost and benefit or impact and feasibility or any other combination of factors relevant to the decision that you need to make. And secondly, I think where the more visual element of the framework comes into place is actually plotting those options on a grid using your 2 factors as the axes.
Okay.
So in this way, you can clearly see which one of the options are in that sweet spot against both criteria, and hence might be worth, moving forward with.
Okay. So I know this is, as you said, this is mainly an audio. I mean, we are on YouTube as well, but can you describe an example so that our listeners can visualize maybe what one of those 2x2 matrices might look like?
So maybe if we use impact and feasibility as an example, often when you're looking to pursue a strategic initiative, you're looking for something that's high impact, and that might be impact in relation to improved client outcomes. It might also be impact in relation to the impact that it has on liabilities or your cost structure. And then the other aspect is feasibility. So how practical is it? And that could be a combination of things such as the capability that's in place already to implement the various options, but also things like the cost involved. So if you were to think of a 2x2 matrix, so think of a grid with 4 boxes, you might have feasibility on your horizontal axes. So from the left-hand side, your 0 point, you might have, your lower feasibility, your harder to do things, moving all the way to your more feasible options.
Right.
We then look on the y-axis, that's your impact. So we want to plot our options from low impact to high impact. And again, there's a number of quantitative methods you could use to actually determine what that impact is, but we're generalizing here.
Yep.
So essentially what that leads to is a grid where the top right corner is your sweet spot, and that's the things that are high impact, but also really feasible to implement. And that's not to say that you'll only pursue things that are in that quadrant. You might also be looking at, the high impact stuff that might be a little bit harder to implement, but worth the investment in the long run. But it might also highlight those options that are, for example, hard to do and not going to deliver much benefit. And that's a bit of a no-brainer in terms of, you've got limited resources. It might be something that you strike off the list fairly early.
So great. And, you mentioned quantifying things to be able to plot them in there, but, even just sometimes that low high or even a low medium high, just that sort of, general sense of an option and how it rates without having to put a quantitative result against it. That can also really be quite helpful when you're taking stakeholders on the journey as well.
Certainly. And I like that you've brought up the stakeholders, Julia. I think for me, why I really like using a 2x2 matrix is you can engage the stakeholders in the process. And that's both in firstly agreeing on what are the factors that we need to consider in our decision. And when you get buy-in on the factors, I think that people are more likely to accept the decision at the end of the process as well.
Yeah.
And then once you've agreed those factors, you can go through a process where you might rate or rank the various options against those factors and do it within a group, have everyone contribute to the conversation and try to come to a shared understanding of how the options compare against your two decision-making factors. And it ends up being a process that is quite consultative and involves the stakeholders, as opposed to a decision that is, written in a report that people might be more inclined to have an alternative opinion against.
Yep. I'm a huge fan of collaboration, Holly, and I think, making sure that it's not just telling people where it's landed or demonstrating why you've come up with that decision, but involving them in that decision-making process, because especially as consultants, we don't know everything, and we don't always know, particularly around feasibility. There's often nuances that we're not aware of. So by being able to collaborate and have something tangible to collaborate around, and the framework that you've described, it's very powerful. Certainly has been in my experience, and it sounds like it has been in yours too.
Definitely.
Yeah. Okay, so we've got the double diamond framework, we've got the 2x2 matrix, and you've given us a great example there. You said there's a third one. What's that?
There is. And this one actually came a little bit later in terms of my strategy consulting experience. It was only really when I worked in a team that had an expert in this space who brought this to the table, right. And I've been using it consistently ever since.
Okay, tell us about it.
So the third area is change management. And I think that's something that, in a lot of more technical disciplines, change management can sometimes be overlooked. But once you've decided to implement a strategy, you found your sweet spot in your 2x2 matrix, it's really important that we support our stakeholders through the changes that strategy comes with. And this could be anything from transitioning a projection model from Excel to a software solution, or even evolving a team member's role within an organization. And when I'm faced with a change, the framework I like to use here is called ADKAR. So ADKAR is an acronym. We'll go through those 5 words, but ADKAR is the phrase to Google in this case.
Okay, and ADKAR, ADKAR, ADKAR. Yep.
That's right. So ADKAR is a structured approach to change management, and it focuses on 5 elements, being awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, and reinforcement. And essentially this model is a roadmap to guide stakeholders through a change process. And to me, what was new when I first heard about this model was that the model essentially says that these stages need to be navigated sequentially in order to affect change.
Right.
So under the ADKAR model, we begin by creating awareness of the need for change. So that's where your communication strategy comes in. And the ADKAR model says that it's only when stakeholders recognise this need can they build a desire to support change. So once that desire is established, they can then gain the knowledge required to navigate the transition. And with this knowledge, they will be able to implement the change successfully. And finally, we can't suddenly forget, that's where reinforcement comes in and plays a really critical role in solidifying those changes over time.
Wow.
So when I'm supporting an organisation through a change, I really find the ADKAR model helpful in identifying where each of my stakeholders is in that process. Okay. So knowing who's already at the desire stage versus who hasn't really got the awareness yet, that helps me identify, well, what support do I need to provide to enable them to progress to the next stage?
Yeah. So rather than it being a process or an order that you need to implement, it's rather an order that needs to be followed, and it's a way of assessing where people are up in that order of 5, and so therefore what you might need to do to help them move forward.
Exactly.
Wow.
And some of the more rudimentary change management strategies, you might be taking each group of stakeholders through the same stages at the same time. But where the ADKAR model is really helpful is actually challenging you to recognise where is this group or where is this individual stakeholder in the process, and hence what do I need to do to help them progress to the next stage so they can get to the point where they can implement a change.
And that would be a really powerful tool in the toolkit when you've got one of those more challenging situations where you might have one stakeholder that's just not on board, or one, or a subset of stakeholders, rather than thinking about the group as a whole and all on, in the same place in that process. I think it can, I'm just reflecting on what you've told me and thinking how useful that could be as a more advanced stakeholder engagement kind of technique in that situation. So, yeah, great.
And even in the people management space, if you're managing someone and there's a need for them to make a change in the way that they're approaching things, again, it can be a bit of a useful checklist in the sense that until they're aware of, a need to make a change, they won't have the desire. And unless they have the desire, they won't be able to build the knowledge and then move through those subsequent stages. So again, a really helpful model that, seems simple when you first describe it. But to me, it's something that I've always got in my back pocket when helping people navigate, a change or a difficult circumstance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I imagine it could even have some applications to us in our personal lives when we're facing change as well. So yeah, what a great model. Thank you for sharing that. So double diamond, 2x2 matrix, and the ADCAR model. So 3 really interesting frameworks that you've shared with us that you've kind of learned in your strategy consulting career and experience that you've been able to bring and apply in your actuarial work. Yeah.
And if I could, Julia, just share one final thought on frameworks. Again,
Sure.
Strategy consultants, we love our frameworks. The last thing I want to say about strategy frameworks is that using a framework doesn't negate the need to work with other professionals who can bring different skill sets to a problem. But I do see frameworks as a way to help you structure your thinking. And in some cases, they can even be used as a bit of a checklist to identify those areas where, your team might not necessarily have the experience or the capabilities in-house. So it might be an opportunity to benefit from getting some additional expertise involved.
Yeah. And that diverse collaboration is so powerful, isn't it? It's one of the things I've really enjoyed, but have also sometimes found challenging in having a non-traditional kind of career path. But there's so much value in that diverse collaboration, I think, when you can make it work and when you can really harness the ideas and views and approaches that different people have and bridge those communication gaps as well. So talking about diversity and picking up on your points around stakeholders, working with different people, I mean, you have had quite a diverse career to date, Holly, but compared to maybe a more typical actuarial career path. But how has working with people from different disciplines shaped your approach to problem solving?
Yeah, definitely. Well, positively. I do have a really good example of this. So back when I was at Strategic Project Partners, I was involved in a project which our client was a neurotrauma research program. And that research program was co-funded by a university, a workers' compensation scheme, and a CTP scheme. And my team was tasked with assessing the impact of a funding agreement, which aimed at improving treatment and rehabilitation for neurotrauma clients. So as you can imagine, a lot of different stakeholders, a lot of technical knowledge involved in that type of project. And the assessment itself required collaboration among researchers, clinicians, and actuaries, and each of those different groups brought unique insights to the project. So the researchers provided information about the potential neurotrauma interventions that they were investigating. We then spoke with the clinicians who shared how these interventions could affect models of care and the cohorts of individuals who might benefit if these research interventions were to translate. And then finally, the actuaries offered perspective on how new models of care might influence scheme liabilities, taking into account the size of the target cohorts and the current claims costs under the existing models of care. So with such a diverse group of stakeholders and team members, one of the key challenges we faced was ensuring that we all actually spoke the same language. And I've often worked in multidisciplinary teams and found that misunderstandings can arise when we don't take the time to clarify the terms that we're using. And a good example is words like impact and outcome. And these are often used in colloquial, sometimes imprecise ways. And they may carry specific meanings in certain disciplines. So this highlighted to me the importance of developing a shared understanding of the challenge and what the team is trying to achieve at the very beginning of a project, and then consistently revalidating that as you progress. So if I were to return to the neurotrauma program example, I think by leveraging the diverse expertise, both within the consulting team as well as the stakeholders that were part of the neurotrauma program, we were able to quantify the impact of the research and demonstrate that focusing solely on those financial outcomes didn't capture the full range of benefits. So this led to a more holistic consideration of the research. And for me, if I were to reflect on that experience, it's taught me that embracing diverse perspectives not only enhances the problem solving approach, but it also contributes to a more comprehensive solution. And when you're working in those teams, again, we had researchers, experts in neurotrauma. No one is ever expected to be an expert in everything. So it's taught me that it's all about bringing together the right team with the right combination of expertise, focusing on a shared understanding of the problem and aligning the language so that we can all understand each other. That's what really leads to better outcomes for all stakeholders.
Yeah, I love that. And some of the most exciting projects I've worked on as well have been those multidisciplinary teams where you've got just people with all this great different expertise. I just want to ask one question on the point you made around, aligning language. What's one tip that you would have to help align language? I mean, is it a matter of sitting down and, identifying common terms, or, what's one thing that you would do to make sure everyone's on the same page around terminology?
Definitely. I think, Again, I typically have worked on consulting projects. So there's usually a problem statement that says something like, assess the impact to society of this research program, or quantify the contribution that this university has made to the environment, or whatever the problem might be. And I think that the trap is when you don't sit down from the start and define what do we actually mean by an impact.
Yeah.
And I think that, because these are colloquially used terms that we all throw around, in our everyday language, there is a risk that we don't have the same understanding, particularly when you are working with, for example, researchers, academics, corporate clients. These things mean different things in different domains. So I think it's as simple as identifying what are the key terms that we're using, coming together, asking people what their understanding is of those terms rather than forcing a definition upon them, and then coming to that agreement around, well, in this context for this, particular project, how are we going to define the use of this term? And I think defining a term with an example, and sometimes even an example of what it's not, can be really helpful.
Great tip. Thank you. Okay, so you've learned a lot working with different people. You've also learned a lot and reflected on that too. I want to just ask one more question before we wrap up around you coming back to your actuarial studies. Now, I understand that you've had a bit of a break. So what motivated you to come back to your actuarial studies, and what have you learned as part of the new fellowship program?
So after completing my undergraduate, I went straight into strategy consulting, and I did qualify as an associate during the early years of my career. So this was under the previous curriculum, and I was actually the only individual studying the actuarial curriculum within my firm. So at that point in time, I decided to take a break, and I was working in a non-traditional area. And to speak really honestly, I wasn't sure which subjects from the Part 3 curriculum would be most relevant to me. So I thought I'd take some time, figure out, which subjects, would be my sweet spot rather than jumping into anything.
Fair enough.
So as I got deeper into my career, I was able to figure out the areas that I enjoy working in, but also appreciate the value of the qualification. So this motivated me to return to the fellowship program, and I did that this year, starting with the enterprise management subject.
And how's that going?
And I have really enjoyed the refreshed curriculum.
Yeah? What's different? What are you noticing that's different?
I think one of the key messages that's been reinforced both semesters so far from different lecturers is that a well-prepared student should pass. And I think that, again, being someone who, particularly when I transitioned into an actuarial team at EY, observed a lot of people who were studying, I didn't feel that sentiment all the time. I think that some people, again, we have this impression that it's really difficult and, you could put your best effort in, but, still not make it the first time. And of course, there's no shame in that. But I think that my experience of the course so far is that, this concept of a well-prepared student should pass. I think it's been true to my experience. Julia, I think there's probably a lot of people out there like me who maybe didn't resonate with the previous curriculum, or maybe they decided to take a break, whether that was to focus on their career or maybe family. And to those people, I do encourage you to reconsider the fellowship program. I know there's been a lot of effort in revitalising the curriculum, and there's also a couple of new subjects around banking principles and data science applications. So this could be a really good opportunity for those people with either really diverse career paths like me, or maybe for whatever reason decided to take a break of their studies midway through. It could be a really good opportunity to engage with the program.
Well, I'm glad to hear that you're enjoying your experience of being back studying and that the new education program is better and maybe more of a level playing field, and maybe also offering some additional options for people as well who maybe weren't sure whether they wanted to pursue fellowship under the old program. So best of luck in your continuing studies, Holly. So look forward to seeing you on the fellowship list in the near future. So, Holly, it's been great hearing today about your experience in strategy consulting, what you've learned, how you've applied that to your actuarial career, what you've learned from working with people from different disciplines, and also a little bit about where you're up to with your studies and what's brought you back to actuarial studies now. I want to close with one final question, and it's this. Holly, what is one tip that you'd have for actuaries who are interested in strategy consulting?
So I think a tip that I would have for anyone interested in strategy consulting is to focus on developing your storytelling skills. And as I said earlier on when I was talking about influential professionals, it's not just about the data. It's really about how you communicate your insights to make an impact. So you can do this by practicing how you frame your analysis and aiming for a story that is compelling, that connects with your audience, but also answers that all-important question, so what? What am I wanting my audience to take from the data that I'm showing them? And I know you did ask for one tip, but I'm going to give you a second. So my second tip, because I think it's important, is to seek out opportunities to collaborate with people who have different backgrounds. And depending on where you are in your career, this could be teaming up in a case competition with students from a different degree. It could be completing an internship in a non-traditional area, or it could be contributing to a project that's being delivered by a multidisciplinary team within your organisation. And I think that engaging with diverse perspectives can help enhance your problem-solving abilities and really challenge you to communicate your ideas clearly and in a way that resonates with people of diverse backgrounds and a variety of different audiences. And maybe to sum up the whole conversation, strategy consulting is really all about driving action. So being able to translate your findings into a compelling story and provide clear, actionable recommendations, that's the key. That's what we're aiming for.
Great advice. Holly Briffa, strategy consultant and actuary. Holly, thank you so much for your time and your tips today. I'm sure your advice and examples will resonate with a lot of actuaries. So thank you.
Thanks, Julia. I really enjoyed the conversation. And if anyone wants to hear more about strategy consulting, I'd welcome anyone to connect with me on LinkedIn.
Fantastic. Thanks, Holly. We'll put that link in the show notes and also the frameworks that you talked about too. Thanks so much for your time.
Thanks, Julia.
So there you have it, real life stories and practical tips from a leader using their actuarial superpowers to make a difference in the world. If you enjoyed this episode, feel free to get in touch, subscribe, leave us a review and share it with your network. You'll find details from today's interview in the show notes below and on our website www.guardianactuarial.com.au. Until next time.